With that, we actually close the session, but not the conference. We now have some time for a general discussion of everything that's been heard today, and I'd like to turn over the floor to our mediator, Mr. Momilian, who will mediate this discussion. I mentioned at the beginning that there were cards for you to write down questions that you may think or may feel that you would like the floor to answer or one of the speakers to answer. I believe we still have people online, so we still have Ron. I think we also have Deborah still online, so I think we can hear. I can unmute those. Can you unmute yourselves? Deborah, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, yes, okay. I have just done that.
Great, and Edward as well, could you also unmute yourself? And Ron, if you could stop sharing your slides. Ron, could you stop sharing your slide?
Oh, sure. Okay. Sorry.
If I manage to do this. Okay, Mo, take it away.
I haven't got any of those cards. So,
Meg, you can also unmute yourself too.
First hand up is Yael.
I have a question to Stilian. Okay, this morning you presented that if we have smaller cells near homes, there will be less radiation. But I say there will be more radiation because we are adding and not just dividing. We're dividing and then adding a lot. Are you sure about what you're saying, that there will be less radiation? Because it does not seem that that's what's going to happen.
First of all, we check this. it's not based on supposition, but we measure this. And no, it's not theoretical. No, the use is going up anyhow. This is we see that the use not only in Israel but all over the world, it's twofold higher every year. Every year, the people are downloading and also sending 2 times more data. When you about the speaking to the phone, it's almost nothing from the point of view of data, and the use of data, it's twice to every time. Now, if you are close, we speak about 2 kinds of small cell. Small cell, this means mainly much more base station and smaller one closed and outside the houses, not inside the houses. And the other thing I mentioned, that is need for femtocell inside or inside the house, in order for this device to be a device for the last meter, not for the last mile. If you are not using, nothing is emitted in the house. The femtocell, it's speaking only with your phone, not to your neighbors, not outside, only with your phone. And if you are not calling, or are not receiving calls, the femtocell doesn't send the data. And the data from the femtocell, the outer world, it's through the wire, to the internet wire. It can be optical cable or something else. But if you are measuring, we see also that every time we change the generation, In the beginning, it's a huge drop in the exposure. After that, because the use it's higher and higher, and more people became addicted to the cellular phones, it increases, but not in the beginning.
There will be more antennas near homes, and the use will rise, and the children inside the houses will be exposed.
No, look, you can look. This is the reason I put the movie. It's exactly like the light in the city. You have to decide if you want huge projectors or small lights. It's your decision. When you receive more light,
I don't think it's
I think it's a case of half of one, half a dozen of one, or six of the other, as the expression goes. Certainly, it's true that if there's more antennas out there, then the phone, which is the principal source of radiation for almost all of us, the phone is going to work less, and there'll be less total exposure from the phone and in general. Um, Just a second. I hear what you say. Let me get there. The point I think that Stellan is trying to make is that there's different types of antenna and different types of base station. If we consider what we define as a base station today, it is basically the antennas that we see outside, be they the large masts or small cells or even microcells. And without a doubt, they are pushing out radiation which has to go through walls to get inside houses, which actually is where most of us are situated, and most of us are going to be using our cell phones, if we're honest with ourselves. So there is environmental noise and pollution from those large antennas out there. Even on the minimum scale, a small cell is going to be pushing out something like 5 watt. Yeah, a mast in Israel is at least limited to 20 watt. Other countries, there's no real great limits. Even less, yeah? Much more. See? I get it wrong. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Ron, Meg, Edward, and Devra, if you're not speaking, you should probably put it on mute, and it'll reduce a lot of the background noise. That's sort of the protocol with the Zoom technology. Thanks. Somebody just cut back on that.
So the idea of the femtocell, at least as I understand it, is that we go for a completely different idea of an extremely low power source inside the house. Because at the moment, what's being pumped through into your house from outside so that people inside get the coverage they so desperately want so they can download the film, I don't know what, is such that, yes, everyone is exposed, including those who have no rights in the matter, babies and whatever. So if somehow you can reduce the outside exposure to the level where it won't go through walls by actually having very low exposure inside, overall in the long run, the idea is that, yes, you would reduce to anyone. It's the playoff between our consumerist demands and wants, yeah, and the actual public safety which we have to consider and think about. Because of the way that the cell phone has integrated and insinuated itself into our modern society to the extent which, frankly, we can almost not live without it now, we actually have to look for manageable solutions which reduce the risk. They can't cancel it and they can't stop it, unfortunately, but will reduce the risk. And I think that's the idea that Stelling is putting out here. Yeah.
another question. Suppose that I do not use any wireless technology in my house. Do I have to put this cell thing in my house?
no. Okay. It's like Wi-Fi. If you are going to buy a Wi-Fi device, you have it. If not, nothing will oblige you. Now you are receiving, again, if your neighbor is downloading a movie, you are receiving the same radiation like your neighbor. And not only you, but all the block. And with these femtocells, it's something different. If you not, you will not have a femtocell in your house, and no wireless devices in your house, no radiation at all. Because the radiation, first, now they are going up and up with the frequencies. Higher frequencies are less penetrating the walls, and nothing will be inside. Like in a hospital. In a hospital, why they put this? No, no. Why they put the indoors cell? Not to disturb the all the measurement devices in the hospital. Otherwise, before, without this indoor deployment, you can speak with someone and see that no pulse at all.
Well, I think what we're talking about is today and yesterday. We're not talking about tomorrow. Tomorrow is 5G, and in cities, the 5G will be every 100 yards, every 100 meters, and it will be at a height of about 20 feet that it's radiating. And in order to have that level of radiation, we're going to be walking around in a world of radiation. You're talking about installations that are much lower level of transmission, and it's the 5G that's the problem. I think that's what you need to be addressing and not what you've been concentrating on at this meeting.
Okay, let's speak about
Amir?
Okay, so I would like to develop this discussion about
Oh, you want to talk?
your assumption.
Oh, could we let this gentleman talk about
Yeah.
what we're discussing?
Yes.
now, and then we'll come
I would like to also discuss about the same thing. Okay, so please, Michal.
Stelian, you said correctly that the standard in Israel is 10 times better than in Europe. I think you had a positive role in it, and I appreciate it a lot. But it must have not been easy to resist the drive to raise the standard. But for the future, the standard is still high. We heard from Ronnie Sager that at level 10 times below the Israeli standard, you see strong effects at the human cell level. So we should think of ways to decrease this radiation. A possible way would be putting many base stations, as you said, but limiting the radiation standard to much lower levels, such as the biological levels Ronnie Segert spoke about, which are, say, 10 times lower than the current standard, and let the cellular companies deal with the situation.
It's no problem at all. There is no straight linkage between the, like I exposed in the morning. It's not a straight linkage between the standard, what you call the standard, and the actual exposure. If you are looking everywhere in the country, you'll see that the exposure, the actual exposure on the streets, on the houses, in any place, it's much lower than in I think it's in not Strasbourg, how we call it, in Austria. In Salzburg. In Salzburg, where the standard it's much lower, and you can measure. Just let me finish the idea, and you can measure. You can see. We can reduce the standard. It's no problem to reduce the standard. Our only problem, and I think that maybe in the next mouse we'll solve it, is the AM antennas. We're one of the few countries that still have medium range AM antennas, and this is the main radiation we have for radio. The last time I tried to stop the AM antennas, was the second war with Lebanon, and I understand by myself why it's need, because it's only the radiation penetrating the walls of the shelter, and it's not possible to use. We checked also if it's possible to use only in
You can
in
restrict the
emergency,
standard only for
in the
100
emergencies,
megahertz
and
and
it's
down.
not possible because it's the all devices. But now the Ministry of Telecommunication decided by itself to stop the AM. Okay, and the other problem is that if you want less radiation, you need more antennas. Okay, but the people, there are two factors. The people doesn't want to see antenna. We are publishing every antenna in the internet, even before it was erected, and the people didn't want to see antenna. The mayors of the cities they don't want to see antennas, and the cellular company have no money to erect new antennas, and this is the reason that the main thing we are trying to reduce is the actual exposure. When you can measure by yourself, and I think that Amir is measuring all the time. You can measure the radiation in every place and see that it's very low exposure. And the main exposure.
I have so much to say.
I think Amir has been waiting patiently to speak.
I think if the standard is reduced, people will not resist the more antennas. People resist the antennas because they know the standard is too high and they are afraid of the antennas. If the standard is low, it will be less frightening.
For you, not for other 9 million people. Because you understand that for less radiation, if you want to be sure that it will be less radiation, you need more antenna. But not other people are not understanding it. They didn't understand the linkage between the phone and the antenna. And if you want to explain them that there's a linkage between the. And they see also in the United States. In the United States, if you ask a senator what is the need for a nuclear reactor, and they say that it's for the electricity, that it's a foolish thing. If I need the electricity, I plug in,
Yes.
and I have electricity. I don't need a nuclear reactor.
But lower standard, it is okay.
No.
Thanks.
We have a man who has been sitting waiting for 10 minutes to get his point of view expressed, and we're not going to continue this argument. Amir?
Well, actually, on the same issue, I've been. No,
But
it's.
you have a right to speak.
Since Stilian showed this presentation, I have this in my belly, and now I want to load it off. Okay, so it's not the first time I'm seeing your presentation. It's my head and my heart and everything. Okay, I think that there is under measurement in all the process, in all the techniques and all the ways that RF radiation is measured today. You know that. That's what I think, that's what I feel. We've been discussing that for years. Putting that aside, I think that the current situation that most people want and don't want cell phone all the time, do not understand how much it can hurt them and do not understand the risk. And for those people, I would say, okay, put a femtocell or microcell in your house and have a reception. Enjoy the reception. Pay with radiation exposure. Regarding small cells, there are two types of small cells. There are what's being deployed in the US on every street corner as part of the 5G vision, that you will have an iLink with every cell tower. Those towers are like mini towers, but it's still very high radiation, and people are getting hurt there. Some of them call me, some of them send me email. I know what the situation on the field is. And I think this implementation is bad, In the end, more people have eye links, meaning that they are very close or closer to this lower watt transmitter, but still the distance is much lower than to the big tower that they used to be getting service from. But in 2004, for example, I've been in China and I've seen their small cells that were 0.1 watt RMS at every 10 meters, and they were in the middle of the road, not close to nothing. This is not close to apartments or building. I think this is a good compromise, but not the 5 watt so-called small cells. I think that we have to address that. I'm coming from the electronic world, from the electronic engineering world. You first have to acknowledge that there is a problem, and then you have to set new requirements. Right now, the requirements are better service and lower price for this service. Health is like never considered, or maybe it's the third requirement. If we set health as a first requirement, acknowledging that there is biological damage and even very low levels, I'm talking about below 0.1 microwatt per square meters, then I think we will be able to design, our engineers, our electronics engineers and RF engineers will be able to design a network that will provide service even better than today and still hold those requirements and be able to facilitate every use that is signable today and in the future with having lower level of exposure. I, for myself, I've been measuring since 2004. I measure for my own safety or knowledgement, and other than the fact that I know and think and believe that there is other measurement in every device that you use, you actually do not see exactly what there is. You see an underestimation of what there is. Because of technical reason, I have a presentation tomorrow about it. But I've seen an increase over the years. For example, in 2004, in 2006, I was able to live in Dizengoff in Tel Aviv. Today, I cannot walk the street there. The levels are too high for me, even for a short walk. I've left the center of Israel because the levels in the house that I rented in 2008 were climbing up, and I wasn't able to sleep there anymore. So I moved to Zichron Yaakov. And now I see also a rise also in Zichron Yaakov. Over the years, it's rising all the time. And about lower standards and the AM and FM issue, I think that it can be restricted, that the newer standard, the biological standard, will be effective only for 120 megahertz and up, and that will leave FM and AM aside and will not have to deal with it right now. We have to remember also AM and FM are not pulsing. They are 100% duty cycle. I think this is a different story. So, and if it's a hard thing to deal with right now, we can restrict it outside of the new standard. I think a new standard and an acknowledgement of biological damage and biological issues caused in very low levels of RF is something that will change both the number of people that will become EHS and will develop other symptoms and will not identify themselves as EHS, and both will improve the network ability to handle future challenges. I think this is the right way to do it. And frankly, I feel like when people say we need more antennas, they don't mean 1 million antennas of 1.1 watt RMS. They mean another 100 antennas of 60 or 80 or 120 watt, just to give more data, not to improve radiation safety, not to improve, to lower the levels of radiation. I think, again, first we have to acknowledge, then we have to set a criteria for lower levels, and then the technology will adapt. We will not adapt, but the technology should adapt. New technology should erupt and present itself to hold those standards, to be within those new standards. Thank you very much.
I think that's an extremely interesting and rather important comment, that it is really a case of prevention, thinking before we leap forward, which is really important. And I do agree with you that if industry is forced to reconsider how the cell phone constellation should work, it will succeed. It has succeeded every time beforehand. Which comes to the point of policy, and it comes back to the point of regulation, because there is no way that industry will do it if it is not forced. And that is the bottom line here. It is the commercial incentive which drove the cell phone industry in the beginning. It is the commercial incentive that will change cell phone industry in the future. And so I think a lot of work has to actually be put on policy. How do we get to the policy makers, the decision makers, especially in this ridiculous country of ours where we don't even have a government for God knows how bloody long? How do we get to our parliamentarians, to our policy makers, with such a message that despite the lobby of industry, which I understand fully, they don't want to put money if they don't have to put money, but will be forced by regulation to rethink and rechange what cell phone communication should be. Yeah, sure, Daniel.
Thank you very much. And I thank Stelian for being with us and enabling us to ask questions. And my point is not 5G and cellular radiation. I want to refocus on the Internet of Things and Wi-Fi. First Wi-Fi in schools, then Wi-Fi as the first option that when routers are being implemented in-house, they're usually Wi-Fi and not wired. So could we transform first in the education system and then in the domestic sector for wired internet? That's one thing. Secondly, the Internet of Things, and especially applications which, for example, baby monitoring, smart meters, all kinds of unnecessary sources of radiations which do not conform to the logic of more antennas, less radiation, because there are more sources of radiation, period. Thank you.
Okay, I hope I'll have the chance to answer. First of all, the Wi-Fi in school, the Ministry of Environment opposed the Wi-Fi in schools. And in the first amendment of the General of Ministry of Education, it was written clear that have to be internet, wire internet. After a lot of pressure from the schools themselves, they decided for new schools will be an internet put in from the beginning, wire internet, but for the existing school will be Wi-Fi with limitation, will be used only for the educational purposes, a few hours a day, according to there's a whole scheme from I think that for the first class is nothing, and after that an hour a day and things like that. And you are right, it's, the better thing is not to use, because in the school it's a mandatory education. You have to send your children to the school, and there is no way to be Wi-Fi. Another reason I used was that there are mainly, it's enough that it's only one child in the school with EHS, and like you are preparing the school for someone without legs or with another disability, you have to prepare the school, even if the only one child is EHS in the school. Internet of Things, we also oppose the use of, from the same reason you put, we wrote a letter to everyone that we are not, we don't think that using wireless smart measurement devices is a good idea, it's a smart idea. And we succeeded with the electricity company. Everything, the smart counters are through wire. They also have wires. It's the same wire like the electricity. You can put another frequency. We succeed less with the gas and with the water, but in the end they didn't deploy the system. Only, I think that only in Petah Tikva and only a few towns. And what Amir said, we measure also. We measure with many, with your device. We measure the Wi-Fi with your device, with our device. And the sampling rate doesn't change in the contrary. With a higher sampling rate, you are receiving less radiation. And you can, okay, anyhow, these are the results. We measure, we did anyhow, we measure with high sampler, with less, with lower sample, and because it's integrative, this is the reason that we are receiving higher results with quite a low sampling rate. And I also think that the health is the first. It's even now in the first place. No one will put any technology, anything without first dealing with the health system. We have a problem that the WHO, who is decided for our health, doesn't cope with our purposes.
I think we have someone, one of our guests who's with us electronically wants to speak. Oh, Deborah, go ahead.
Yes, if you can hear me. All right. I'm very concerned. I really appreciate what Israel is doing. They are doing much more than many countries. But there's something missing from our discussion that I want to raise. And that has to do with the energy consumption of the 5G base stations. They are expected to consume about 3 times as much power as a 4G base station. In addition, the 5G is going to be very heavy demand on batteries. And so a group of energy economists have calculated that while there will be some gain in efficiency with a lot of what's being proposed, it will in fact be consuming even more energy, so that the gain in efficiency that you get from 5G, if and when it's operating for appliances, will be swamped by the increase in demand. And South Korea, which has a patchy 5G system right now, people are starting to question whether it's worth it, because as you all understand, you have to buy 5G phones, 5G routers, 5G computers, 5G baby monitors, and all of these things, of course, are going to cost more money. Huawei came out with what was called a baby safe router. A baby safe router meant a router that went to sleep except when it was being used. And one could imagine setting up a default assumption. Certainly, with anything that you were going to have in your home, you would want it to be asleep, or frankly, wired is always going to be better for health reasons as well as for security reasons. So I want to say that industry reports are that you're going to be 5G base stations and phones will be power guzzlers, and that the growth of energy consumption is estimated right now at 9% a year, which is clearly not sustainable. So we have to start to think about the energy demands as well, meaning the electricity demand, as well as what this means for health. And finally, Stelian, I just want to stress that from a biological point of view, we need to focus on peaks, especially when it comes to our children. The peak exposures over time, repeatedly, are the ones that we think are contributing to some of the damaging effects that I showed at the opening earlier in your today. Thank you.
Just to jump on the bandwagon, so to speak, I'd like to point everyone to Amir's talk tomorrow, just particularly on the problems of proper measurements, specifically when we talk in terms of average values, but we actually have to measure peaked values. So that's just an aside, a little advert for tomorrow.
Hello, it's Meg. Can you hear me?
Yes, Meg, we hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you ever so much. This is just a tremendous gathering. I just wanted to add one more point to what Deborah just said, and that has to do with the materials used for these quite exotic devices. They require rare metals and so on. And when you look at the short longevity, really, of these particular kinds of devices and the types of materials that have to be mined and so on for them, that's another aspect of their lack of their lack of sustainability.
Do we have any further discussion? Any further discussion?
Yes, Mo, I have one more point I'd like to make briefly, and that is I'd like to know whether Israel has the legal authority to test phones or laptops or tablets for the radiation that is emitted from them, or whether they simply assume that the manufacturer is warranting that it's a, quote, safe level. Does Israel have the authority to test these devices?
I don't know, but my guess is that it doesn't have the will.
Stelian wants to answer that, right?
I answered it. There is no such authority. The approval for the cell phones are from the Ministry of Telecommunication. They didn't measure, they did not measure nothing. And the measurements are done by a laboratory outside the country, and is done for a prototype of the phone. And what we oblige the firms, all the cellular firms, not the small laboratories dealing with that every phone after was repaired to be a comparative measurement to see that it will not emit higher power than in the beginning.
Well, Israel's in a unique position, I believe, because you could do something that nobody else has done. You could actually measure the real world radiation from iPads and other devices in classrooms.
We did this like in 2015. We measure in the laboratory of the Holon Technological Institute, and we found that there are a few phones, like in France they found recently, that there are a few types of phones that emit higher SAR close to the board.
I would just like to ask a quick question. We're talking about real-world exposures and working with consumer devices available to all of us. can we do anything to relate these real-world exposures to some real-world measures of biomarkers? In this conference, we heard quite a bit about an increasing body of knowledge and libraries of information about such biomarkers. Can there be some pilot studies to put to use the information on these biomarkers in relation to the exposures that we're all talking about, so as to give some real meat to some of our concerns?
Would someone like to speak to that?
Or am I being naive?
I'll try and give a quick answer because most of the biologists unfortunately have left. It is a good question, and it is not a simple question because I think the research. It is a good question, but not a simple question because I think most of the research required to identify very specific biomarkers, which you could say, aha, this is because of cell phone radiation, hasn't been done. I suspect that we're not going to see specific biomarkers because it may come down to a very small molecular change happening on a single enzyme. One of the illuminating features of Rod Seeger's talk was the fact that we're talking about cascades. And we're not quite sure where in the cascade the trigger may be. But if it is early on in the cascade, and you wouldn't require much, it can be amplified logarithmically 3 times, 4 times. And so it's not a simple question to answer, but what is definite? To do the research requires a lot of interdisciplinary research. It requires an institute-based research. And that requires funding. And as we all know, it comes down to the money. Where's the money going to come from to set such a thing up? And where's the support going to come from to make it work?
Any further questions or concerns? Hearing none, we're about at our time limit tonight, and I know we'll have another really hot discussion tomorrow morning. I want to thank you all for your participation, and have a wonderful night. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow.
Just to remind everyone, we reconvene here tomorrow morning, 8:30, for the final sessions of this meeting. Thank you all very much.